You're listening to Arsenal Pass, a flesh and blood podcast for players by players. And all about strategy, leveling up, and the latest news in the world of Wraith. Welcome to Arsenal Pass.
Welcome back to episode 14 of Arsenal Pass. I'm Brendan Patrick, joined always by calling champion Hayden Dale. Hayden, how are you doing?
I'm good, thanks, Brendan. How are you?
I'm fantastic. So this week we're back with one of our class deep dives. For these episodes, Hayden and I dedicate an entire episode to breaking down a specific class and constructed, with a focus on core fundamentals, ways to build and play the hero, key cards, strengths and weaknesses, how to win with it, and how to beat it. Our second stop sees us with the agile, combo-centric, and sometimes turtle-loving Ninja. But first, Hayden, let's delve into your week in Fab.
Yeah, good week in Fab so far, Brendan. It's been a little bit quieter for me. Again, feels like a bit like Groundhog Day, still in lockdown here in Sydney. So, but still able to play some online events, which has been great. Our local, our LGSs here have been running online events where they can. So played a couple of armories this week, which is nice. Still getting to, play games with the people that I usually see once or twice a week. So, that's been good. Played Blitz yesterday. Managed to play in the Fab Gauntlet this week as well, the Discord Gauntlet. So that was great. I don't often get to play it. I think it's only the second or third time I've played it. So had to give a bit of charity in the semifinals and scoop to the one Brendan Patrick because I had to go to a meeting because it was still the daytime for me. But give back to the community, and in this case that was Brendan Patrick. What about you, Brendan?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I've also been playing a few armories. I played the Gauntlet as well. So usually I stream it, but we decided to, Dante and I both decided to play it, mostly because I was feeling ill, but we may consider just playing moving forward until Nationals, just because right now Fab Gauntlet is kind of the best tournament out there for bang for your buck. It's about $5 and you can play 8 rounds. So it's a really good deal to try to get games in. So, and it was also really fun. Like I enjoyed playing it, casting it week to week. It does get a bit tiring sometimes, so It was nice. It was really interesting how the top 8 broke down. The top 4. The top 4 ended up being me in first seed, Dante Delfico in second seed, Hayden Dale, tower number 9. So pretty much almost everyone in our play group just landed in the top 4, which is like super unlikely with how the top 8 cut. We all missed each other in the first round. I ultimately lost to Dante in the final, where I actually punted. That's good and bad. But yeah, I was on Ira. I know you were on Kano. Adopted the legendary Brendan list. I know you said you've been enjoying it. Yeah, it's a fun one, and if it's the perfect list. So if you're playing armories and stuff while you're working, nothing's better than getting good at that Kano list because you bang out a 5-minute game and you're totally in control. It's not a high roll deck. It's not an aggro deck. Like it's a very, very controlled deck, and it rewards high skill and familiarity with the deck. But you're still gonna bang out your match in 5 minutes. Go back to what you're doing. Come back in 30 minutes. Get another one. Go again. And I think it's a really, really good deck to if you're kind of playing back-to-back Blitz, because things like Ira and Dorinthia can get pretty tiring.
Yeah, I think it's just so season 1 of Skirmish, the first few skirmishes I played Kano and was having a lot of fun, and I away from that I wanted to play as many heroes as I could in Skirmish season 1. So this is my first time going back to Kano and Blitz since then, and I just forgot how fun it is and how much I enjoy playing the hero, especially in the Blitz format, which to be honest isn't traditionally my favorite format. So no, it's been good.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. I want to do a quick shout out to our YouTube channel, Arsenal Pass. If you are interested in playing Kano and Blitz, we did a very in-depth deck tech and guide on how to play it. So if you want to check that out, that is on our YouTube channel. Easy to find. It's just Kano deck tech. But yeah, hope you guys like it and enjoy it. And hope to see more Kanos out there if I play more Gauntlets. But with that, Hayden, why don't you take us into the news?
Most certainly. So I guess first piece of news, Road to Nationals, the list of Road to Nationals is finally being officially finalized. So we've been talking about it for a couple of weeks since we've known about the Nationals and Road to Nationals events popping up. We now know there's going to be 175 Road to Nationals in total over the regions that currently support Flesh and Blood or have Flesh and Blood open to them for 6 weeks. So it starts July 31st. We've got the first rounds of Road to Nationals across the world. and that goes for 6 weeks total. So it's only basically from when this pod drops, Friday your time in the future. It's 15 days away, so it's super exciting. 175 road to nationals. To actually get into a nationals event is going to be, it's not going to be easy. So it is going to be a spot that you can definitely sort of cover to some degree. So looking forward to that. Brendan, do you have any on the opening weekend, on the weekend of the 31st?
The weekend of the 31st, let me do a quick flick to my tab here. I do not. Yes, I do. So I have one on that Sunday, I believe. Yeah, sorry, I saw it was August 1st. And then I remembered that it was the month immediately after that. So yes, I do have one that weekend. My road to nationals are looking pretty reasonable. Only have to travel to a place that I really don't want to travel to once, which is Houston. Not a fan of Houston. It's about 5 hours out into very hot, humid area.
Sorry,
but there's not too much to do.
do.
Yeah, well, it's not that I dislike the people there or anything like that. It's not my favorite tourist spot. There's a city in the south called Austin, which is the capital, which is, I think, much more fun to kind of go there. You can bring your partner. Like, I'd bring my dog, go to the river and stuff. But alas, I will be grinding it out in Houston, and then going up north for Oklahoma and Kansas. Other than that, we are a bit lucky in Dallas here. I think we have 4. It might be 3. Yeah, so quite nice. Definitely very excited for that. But yeah, just in case anybody knows, to qualify for Road to Nationals, you will need to get top 4 to qualify for Nationals. I misspoke. You need to get top 4 in a Road to Nationals event. The event invites do not pass down. So, for instance, if someone top 4s who's gotten it before, you will not get it if you are in 5th or 6th or something like that. But if you don't manage to make a top 4, there is another way to get in, which is 90-day XP. The 90-day XP that counts towards that started last Monday. And yeah, so to kind of speculate on what XP value you should shoot for, it definitely depends on your region. It's a bit hard. I think that if you're in a few Road to Nationals, those are going to be 6x XP modifiers. So if you're in 4 or 5 of those, you should be good if you have a positive win rate, because you're going to get a lot of experience from that. If not, you may need to try to get into some armories and prepare for that. And yeah, I don't know. Some regions are speculating around 50. Other ones are saying around 150 being the cutoff. The reason it's all speculative is the way it works is they have a set number of invites, I believe, for Road to Nationals. They invite those players who got top 4, and then to fill the rest of the spots, they go down the 90-day leaderboard. So it's sort of a dynamic, choice.
Yeah. Depending on how well people do in those nationals repetitively. The best Road to Nationals, the best thing to do is to play as many Road to Nationals as you can, because not only is the top 4 spot there, but the modifier for XP is great. So you're playing those events, playing a few locals here and there, you're probably going to get in, which is fantastic.
Yeah, it's a very, very reasonable goal to qualify on XP. So if you're playing the game actively, you should get in. But then again, you can always top 4 because there's fantastic prizes at the Road to Nats as well. But just want to talk about the new YouTube video that dropped for Legendary Studios, the second in the series for Devastation. We saw Shane versus Azalea. It was a different take on the Shane deck from what we see kind of more popular in the meta. It did utilize Sonata Arcanics. And then, yeah, I mean, it was, I don't really know how to go too much in depth on the gameplay, because we did see a bit of the Mon variants. Jason Chung seemed to draw very, very hot, while the Azalea player, it was a bit average for them. The Azalea deck was pretty standard to what we see, a redliner deck. Obviously looking to, hit the Shane player with multiple red ledgers, multiple Relorsis, maybe a sleep dart. But it kind of fell down in the face of Art of Wars back-to-back and these, these big things that Shane can do. What did you think, Hayden?
Yeah, I would have liked to seen, the one thing with the Devastation series is I'd almost like to see like a best of 3, just to showcase these heroes a bit more. I understand they want to get through all the heroes and give them all a bit of spotlight, but it felt like we didn't really get to see anything out of Azalea, so I would have maybe like to see a best of 3 just to give some, I guess, extra gameplay in there, because I think it only lasted for 4 turns in total. Not, if you haven't seen it, stop now and go have a look if you do want to see it. we've kind of spoiled it already. But yeah, no, I'm enjoying the series. I'm excited to see what matchup we get next. Presumably, Jason is still playing through. He might play his third deck, which I can't even remember what his third hero is, but he'd be playing that into Carol, who may play his favorite Rhino to start, or he might pick something else up. So yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Wanted to shout out as well that we had episode 3 of Time in the Round come out last week. I know we had some messages about Time in the Round. Obviously, for those who have seen it or for those who haven't seen it, it's a lot more freeform than the podcast we usually do. So than this podcast that we're doing right now, where we talk about the game, we talk about current metas, we talk about last week we talked about some of the cards that we felt were really being underplayed or had been underappreciated in the constructed format so far. So yeah, go check that out. Let us know what you think, and we'll definitely be releasing future episodes of that where we go in depth about some topics, or we talk about what's really topical at the time that maybe just doesn't feel appropriate for the Arsenal Pass podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. That is kind of the sort of sub podcast of this podcast where me and Hayden more, let loose, talk about our opinions on the game and, what we're currently doing in the day-to-day, day-to-day life in Flesh and Blade per se. But also want to shout out that we had a Levia versus Ira Blitz gameplay go up on CFB. This is probably our last Blitz gameplay video for a while. It was actually really tight. It was cool to see Levia sort of pull through, and it was had a really strong showing in that matchup. And I was really impressed by it. And yeah, go check it out if you can. If you do end up on CFB and you are shopping around, we do have we are an affiliate, so we do have a code which is Arsenal Pass, no space. So if you can check that in, it always helps us out.
Yeah, and we also, actually, I was just going to say, I had tons of fun playing the game. Livia has been a bit of a pet deck of mine in Blitz recently, before moving back to the Kano, and I've just had a lot of fun with what Livia can do and some of that kind of toolbox aspect of that Blitz deck. So when we get to the next format, if it's still relevant, we might look to do a deck tech on Blitz Livia, or see where we are when next season of Skirmish or Blitz rolls around. And we also have some gameplay that's going to go up on the Arsenal Pass channel this week of Bravo and Prism. So keep an eye out for that. That should be going up in the next couple of days.
And speaking of the Arsenal Pass YouTube, our subscribers have been kind of absolutely exploding. We surpassed the goal of 500, where Hayden would dye his hair blonde, and now we're on to 1,000, in which Hayden will do some other crazy thing, I'm sure. But just want to shout that out if you're interested in, in-depth deck techs, gameplay, and also Time in the Round, the kind of sub-podcast we talked about. That's a YouTube exclusive. Go over and check out Arsenal Pass, just Arsenal Space Pass on YouTube, and throw us a subscription. We really appreciate it, and we're going to be trying to spit out more content on that channel as we move forward in the future. All right, throw on that sunscreen because it's 100 and plus something degrees out here in Texas. We're heading over to the Command Cookout section. Hayden, what do we have this week?
Yeah, Brendan, we're back this week. We've got another listener question from Gabriel. So thank you, Gabriel, for the question he emailed in and said, I'm actually just going to go to the email. So Gabriel said, they're a player who's learning, and their question, comes down to two things. They said that on the pod that we talk a lot about having a team, practicing and keeping track of how games are going and things like spreadsheets. And that's had Gabriel wondering two parts. What kind of information do we keep track of, and how do we use this to help? And then if Gabriel was to start keeping personal data, what should they be noting down? And then I'm just going to read the second bit about it as well. This is from this question from Gabriel, and then we'll get into it, Brendan. When you're practicing against teammates or friends, what are you paying attention to in game, and what do you think about at the end of the game? So a couple of things to unpack there. Maybe just start with Brendan, and we'll just kind of get through it.
Yeah, I guess we'll kind of just start from the top down, which is data. So you talked about Excel sheets. We do utilize those. I notably did a little experiment where I did 100 games of Kano, recorded all of them. I would say, I think it was like 30 something games were against, players in private games. And then the rest were in armories. So I recorded all of them. I have, a notes section for every single one. And then I will run some sort of analysis on that as well. But it's really interesting because I can go back after the month and I can see, depending on how much you want to play with the data, but I can see how my win rate changed from the beginning towards the end. I can look at the notes where, I was a bit, you could see like I would be more frustrated with, what I would, so so-called variance, and you can see that go away as I played more and more games. It got better at the class. I generally will have a section on that sheet as well to list all of the heroes and Blitzer class constructed, so that you can write a function to record the win rates just to get an idea, as well as I will record player names. So most of the time it will be my name. Then under there, I'll have a name called Armory, which is just general opponents. And then, if there's someone I play a lot like Hayden, Hayden's name will be in there, and I'll record win rates on that as well. And then the more advanced part of it is with the notes section. You can do kind of a grab all function for all of the words that are written, and you can do a bit of a sentiment analysis on that. And that means that you can write a function to pick out certain words in that kind of long data there. For instance, a word like punt or whiff. So how many times in a sample size of 100 games, how many times does a game punt or whiff or variance or something like that come up? It's actually really interesting because you can, it's not super concrete data, but you can say how many games did I just make a mistake to lose this game, right? And extrapolate from that. I find that to be really interesting.
Yeah. I'm guessing that the highest win rate you have on there is Hayden, and that punt rate's going up. So, but yeah, I think for me, the most important section of those kind of note taking and of the data you can record is the note taking itself, because a sample size of, Brendan played 100 games of Kano. That's a good amount of games. But if we talk about sample sizes and statistics, you need really massive sample sizes with probably different players playing these decks and these matchups. So I find that taking descriptive or reasonably descriptive notes, and then at the end of a testing session, be it with a friend or teammate, or at the end of a week of testing, sitting down together and having a conversation about those notes, trying to synthesize some of that data. Like Brendan said, you can extrapolate stuff. You can also actually just go back through some of those games and be like, okay, what did we learn? I think the what did we learn is one of the biggest things you can take away from Flesh and Blood, because the games can be really that's what I'm looking for. But I guess it's a lot by feel is how you need to do a lot of deck building and tweaking and matchup planning. There's a lot by feel and what happens, and so you need to have those conversations, because what happened in 1 or 2, 3 games, 4, 5, 6 games even, that's not necessarily a good sample size of a game, so you need to extrapolate some things from that. So that's something that I think is really important if you're thinking about keeping personal data. I think, as Brendan said, what you're playing, who you're playing, the results, the keynotes, those are all really important things. And in terms of, the second part of that question that Gabrielle asked, what are you paying attention to in game? I think it depends on what you're trying to get out of your testing. I think you've really got the best way to approach testing is to go, okay, what am I actually trying to get out of this? So if I take an example right now, people will be testing for Road to Nationals, and a lot of people are probably going to their testing going, okay, I just want to find the best deck. Let's just play decks into each other and find the best deck. That's not, I think, necessarily good testing. I think you need to have a lot more of a specific angle to your testing day to day or week to week. So you might go in for the first part and go, okay, we want to find a strategy to beat Chain, for instance, or beat Ninja. So let's go and try X, Y, Z strategies that, in theory, we believe would have a good matchup, and let's play it out and find if our hypothesis is true or not. And I think that's a really good way to test, because then you come away from your session with proper concrete information. You can say you have a yes or no. You advance your testing and to some degree. Whereas if you're really just getting a gauntlet together and just throwing decks at each other with friends or with teammates, you're not necessarily going to come away with a lot of progression. You're going to come away with information, and there's going to be some stuff to try and extrapolate, but the progression of your testing might not advance. So that's one thing I'm really big on, is to make sure that if you are testing, when you're spending time with friends, teammates, whatever it is playing, that you have a bit of a purpose to it, and you kind of advance your understanding of either the format or what you're trying to do.
Yep. Just to kind of quickly sum up things on my end, I think that focus practice is really important. So it's just that classic age-old phrase, practice doesn't make perfect, perfect practice makes perfect. Make sure you have a goal, and you're trying to actually get something done, because just jamming games to jam games is good when you're getting started, but when you're trying to advance a specific skill, it's not really the best way to go, in my opinion. And then this is something we talk about a lot on the podcast, but chase process and not outcome. So when I was doing the 100 games of Kano, there's definitely times while doing that where it was like, I maybe had like a loss streak, or I just was kind of not feeling it. And I just didn't really I kind of didn't want to play Kano. I was like, oh god, I don't want to face another Ira and get razored again, or I don't want to face another Kano, play a coin flip mirror. Like, it's really annoying. But I stuck to the process, stayed on Kano, and finished out my 100 games. And at the end, I felt, very fulfilled after completing that. The sample size I went for. I took the detailed notes on every game, and the end product I had at the end was more important to me than winning a this armory or that armory or whatever. So yeah, I think it's always important to chase process, and then the outcomes the results will come from that.
Yeah, I agree. I think something we both talk about. And Gabrielle, thank you again for the question, Gabrielle. And just to wrap it up, one of the last things that they said in the email was, they kind of summed this up with when trying to level up your game to the top level, how do you learn and improve the most with each game you play? And I just wanted to come back to that a little bit with each game you play, because I think it's so important that you are looking for things to take out of games. If you just play, a game of Flesh and Blood during testing especially, and you're just playing for the sake of playing, and you're playing, out the process of playing, but you're not actually learning from it, is there any point in playing those games? Is it better off that you go away, take a break and come back, or swap to a deck that you know? And on that last point, I think, Brendan, you played 100 games of Kano. You obviously started to learn a lot of intricate things about that deck that you wouldn't have learned if you played 10 games of 10 different decks or 10 different heroes. So in testing, I do think one thing that you can do to get, to really sharpen and hone your skills is to sit on a deck for a while. And you don't have to exclusively play that deck if you're helping out testing groups and you're playing other decks that you're familiar with. But come back to that deck and keep trying to get games in with it, and every game try and take something away from it. What is the takeaway from this matchup, or what is the takeaway from these cards that I've been trying? Try and always have something to take away, because if there's not learning coming out of it, then do you need to be playing that deck? Basically, do you need to be playing those games?
Yeah, absolutely. And with that takes us into the main topic of the pod, which is our Ninja 101. So first off, Hayden, what makes a ninja class unique? Why don't you talk to me a little bit about the heroes, Katsu, Ira, and Benji, what makes them different? And just give me sort of a general overview of the class that we have today.
Yeah. Everyone just goes, 3 ninja heroes. There's only 2 ninja heroes, Brennan. What are you talking about? Yeah, there is, of course.
Forgotten Benji.
Poor Benji. So, yeah, Brendan. So getting into the ninja class, and what makes the 3 heroes that we do have, Ira, Katsu, and Benji, different to one another or unique, is that Katsu was the I was going to say the first ninja hero we saw. Wasn't actually the second ninja we saw, but the first ninja that we had to play with in Welcome to Wraith. And Katsu, really about that hero ability and the combo centric sort of lines that of attack actions that it has. Whereas Ira, very simplistic in design, has that ability to give your second attack +1, whether it be weapon or an attack action card, and we've seen that pretty heavily in the Blitz meta so far since Blitz's inception. And then Benji, something very different, and we haven't seen a lot of Benji. Benji really feels like low to the ground, is about that evasion piece. You've got this ability to pair with your Mask of Momentum to try and get these hit triggers with low power attacks, but have evasion that are really difficult to block because of the hero ability. That still has that +1 that comes into effect. A lot of people, talk about Benji as Ira, but harder. So, quite interesting. But Brendan, why don't we get into some of the history of ninjas and Flesh and Blood? And, I know that both of us started playing Flesh and Blood with the Welcome to Wraith Ira decks, which of course is ninja. So, let's go from there.
Yeah, I can't talk about Welcome to Wraith Ira decks without talking about the man, the myth, the legend, Luke Badger. This is the funnest part of Flesh and Blood trivia that I like to throw out, which is that who's the Ira deck world champion, and that's a man out of New Zealand, like I said, Luke. And I feel like a lot of us in the US don't know that tournament actually happened. There's no footage of it. I know we've talked about it in the pod before, but it was actually an open tournament. I think it had over 100 people. Correct me if I'm wrong. And they literally just played the Ira decks, which is awesome. Because I don't know if you haven't played the Ira decks before, I recommend you do it. They're extremely balanced, and it's actually a really good showcase of the game itself. Obviously, there's no armor and things like this, but yeah, open tournament for the Ira Welcome deck with over 100 people before the game had even kind of come out, right? So really interesting sort of piece of history. So the the first sort of constructed tournament wasn't actually the calling; it was an IRA welcome deck tournament where everybody was just running the vanilla sort of starter deck there.
Yeah,
Um,
everyone had
but
access to
yeah,
just that.
yeah, the early days of Ninja are really interesting. So to understand Ninja and Welcome to Wraith, we have to understand how Welcome to Wraith sort of evolved. So when Welcome to Wraith first came out, you actually couldn't go on YouTube without being, if you had been cookied to to have an interest in Flesh and Blood. Every time you went to YouTube, there was a new video. It was like my Dorinthia deck, 7 wins at Armory, and like that was it. Like everybody was just playing Tall Warrior Dorinthia, like just all reactions, just like hilarious, right? And as we know, Tall Dorinthia is very punishing to new players. It's hard to block against, all of this good stuff. I would say it felt like almost a month that deck was just dominant. And I didn't know anybody playing Ninja. Obviously, I was in the US, so my meta was quite small, but it was, heavily, heavily dominated by Warrior. And from there, we saw a reaction to Warrior with Guardian. So now people started playing Fatigue Guardian, right? And they would just fatigue out these Warrior decks. They would hit them with defense reactions from Arsenal. And a Tall Warrior and Welcome to Wraith because the tools are very limited, didn't have the spoils of war, hit and run, all this stuff. These conditional or these non-conditional go agains. Yeah, I mean you could, if you were just slamming defense reactions into it, didn't have a lot of ways to deal with that. So as a reaction to Fatigue Guardian being a thing, people started playing Ninja because Fatigue Guardian, at least in that iteration, could not really deal with the multiple on-hit triggers going wide, the Kodachis, mostly because they were playing a ton of defense reactions. I mean, Welcome to Wraith is remembered largely as a defense reaction format. Yep. Every deck packed them in. Almost, people were pretty much. I think almost every deck had Sink Below. Like it was a very, very defensive thing. So we saw Ninja come out and start to dominate the meta, right? You definitely had a hard matchup into Warrior. Tall Warrior was slightly easier, I think, as we moved towards the constructed calling. We saw Warriors, Warriors they were still tall, right? Because there wasn't too many ways to differentiate your deck back then, but they started to add in go wide stuff. So they would run, Flock of the Featherwalkers was quite popular, as well as some attack actions to follow up, maybe like a snatch, exactly. So as a ninja in Welcome to Wraith, you had a pretty hard, and when I say as a ninja in Welcome to Wraith, I'm talking about being a mid range because everybody was playing mid range except for when we went to the constructed calling, and Ninja Turtle was basically kind of showcased, right? But as a mid-range ninja in Welcome to Wraith, you had a pretty hard matchup into Dorinthia, but most people at that time considered it to be 50-50. And it was a very, very tempo matchup. Kind of whoever sort of got the lead tended to maintain it because you didn't have these ways to sort of have a massively value-oriented pivot turn like you do now with like a plunder run or something like that. And obviously, Warriors will kind of stack up the Dawnblade counter and just keep smacking you down. So yeah, that was a sort of a 50-50 matchup, and then you were considered favored into Bravo, considered very, very favored actually. One of the only Bravo players that was kind of beating Ninjas back then was Cale McCreath and also Jacob Pearson. They were two players that were big on Bravo back in that day. And then, to be honest, this is criminal, but almost nobody played Rhinar, at least in a serious setting. So that matchup wasn't really considered. But yeah, I mean, like I said, as we moved into the first constructed calling, there was a bunch of mid-range Ninja decks. There was a bunch of mid-range Dorinthia and Bravo decks, a few amount of Rhino decks, and then Ninja Control showed up. Ninja Control kind of shook the game, kind of what people thought the deck building could do in this game, because when we look at Ninja, it looks like it's an aggressive, come at you kind of deck that's going to be trying to find combos and, all this stuff. And Ninja Control just flips that on its head, right? It's like, use Flick Flack to get maximum value. Use Katsu's effect to search up like a Pounding Gale with like nothing coming before it, and just, it's literally all about value, and then play to a Drone of Brutality endgame. And back in Welcome to Wraith, you could absolutely fatigue people, and Drone of Brutality was a ridiculous card. So that's kind of where we ended up. Hayden, I know you also played during that format. You weren't able to show up at the first calling, but what was your sort of takeaways back then?
Yeah, I mean, for me, Ninja always felt like it was holding the aggressive portion of the metagame alongside Dorinthia, and then it was, Bravo in that control space, and Rhinar was trying to find its home. I think going to that calling, Rhinar was actually a fantastic choice. So yeah, Katsu's obviously changed a lot over that time, and to a point now where Katsu's probably faded away to some degree in the last two formats. Actually was a fantastic choice in the previous format, the Crucible format, because of its strong matchup into the Mechanologist mid-range and control decks. And now we're starting to see maybe it come out in this format as well. We saw obviously Kieran from Session Blood take out the charity events in one of the first constructed events, and we saw with Monarch, and we saw at the PTI in Auckland, the ProQuest Winton on the Ninja control deck or the mid-range deck take out that event. So, Katsu's had a pretty good start to this Monarch season. If we talk about, Ira obviously, first of all, in the welcome decks, but then once we got around to the first Blitz calling and, the Blitzathon, LSS's 1 year Blitzathon, we really saw Ira come to the forefront of that format and hasn't really left in Blitz. So that's where Ninja kind of occupies in Blitz. And, to Benji's detriment a little bit, we got Benji, the new Ninja hero in Crucible, and we really haven't seen much of Benji, especially not at a competitive level whatsoever, but even at a non-competitive level. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to talk a little bit about Blitz. So when Blitz was released as a format, Ira actually wasn't the most played deck immediately. So Ira rose to kind of the popularity that you see today when they held the Blitzathon, which was a sort of in-house event. Players came in as well, so community players, and they played a bunch of Blitz games on stream, which is really cool for us in the US because I remember back then we didn't have any events. But basically, the developer Chris Gehring actually played a version that's quite close to where it ended of Ira Control with Drone of Brutality. From then, we saw what would be the dominance of Ira and Blitz. And back then, you were totally utilizing the card Drone of Brutality, right? You would play this very defensive deck, play people to end games, and then sort of just dominate them. Because you had the problem with that deck, and the reason why it's better that Drone of Brutality is gone, is that you still had Ira, the Ira that you know today. You had something pretty close to it. You were, doing almost 10 damage off 2 cards, all of this silliness, right? But at the same time, you won every single endgame scenario, and you didn't have to think about it, right? You could block with drone, you could pitch drone. It doesn't matter. It goes back to your deck. You're going to get there. So Ira drone especially was extremely dominant in Blitz. And then where we see it today, Drone of Brutality obviously got banned. Ira sort of rebounded from that by becoming more aggressive, adding in leg taps. We see today it's double Razor Reflect, double Sigil. That was slightly popular in the first Blitz calling because of Kano, but it was later taken out, but now added back in because the Ira decks are so aggressive. So they are double Razor, double Sigil. They're running usually a Rising Knee, a Hurricane technique. And nowadays we do see the push the points. So Ira has become, it's sort of it's quite different from its former self back in the early Blitz. But yeah, still the deck's core competency is gaining a ton of value off of Flick Flack. Flick Flack is the sort of back that deck rides on, as well as Ira's ability just being massive value, especially on things like Command and Conquer. We see it on Push the Point, things like this. Yep. So yeah, I mean that's. What's up?
No. I was gonna say we could keep wax lyricing like a couple of old timers, about the history of Ninja. But I think, we'll move on to, I guess, to the core of the Ninja 101 maybe.
All right, but enough with history. Let's go ahead and get into the nuts and bolts of Ninja. Hayden, why don't you start us off with how to build it? Yeah.
So how to build it, as we did with Kano 2 weeks ago. If you listen to that episode of Arsenal Pass, we're going to go through some of the key cards for Ninja. Have a quick discussion about why they're so key, why they're so important, and why or why not that these cards should be in your Ninja decks, depending on, of course, which hero you're playing as well. So, Brendan, we can't go far without talking about Mask Momentum, probably one of the strongest cards in the game. Mask Momentum is up there with Scabskin Leathers and, in my opinion, Skullbone Crosswrap is just the most powerful equipment in this game. You can probably add Carrion Husk to that list now, maybe. But the ability that Mask Momentum has of that once per turn, when a attack card you control as the 3rd or higher chain link to hit and a row to hit, draw a card, that is, that always a threat there to have. It's really difficult for your opponent to always be able to block those out. They have to block inefficiently often to be able to stop that mask trigger. So mask, even just the threat of mask does so much. And there's a reason that this equipment is Blade Breakers, because it's so strong.
Yep, like you said, works so well with the Kodachis. The Kodachi is getting you those first 2 usually in that requirement of 3 for your attack action to hit and draw a card. And like you said, your opponent has to often if they can, which if you're playing a game that Classic constructed, they will not be able to do this consistently usually, is block one of those Kodachis inefficiently, either with armor or with a card. If you get armor or a card with that, I mean, that's just great for you as a ninja, especially if you're playing something like Katsu, where you may have 5 to 6 things on that combat chain. You can really do work with Mask.
Yeah, definitely. Moving on, I want to talk about Lord of Wind. So Katsu specialization. This is the end of the chain of the combo set, but this starts with Surging Strike. So this is the start of Surging Strike, 2 cost, go again, 5 at red attack, and then into the Whelming Gust Wave, which is the one that draws your card if it hits and gets +1 for combo, and then the Mugenshi, which is the one that sets you up for that Lord of Wind. That's the 1 cost yellow 4 attack, but gets +1 if you've played that Whelming Gust Wave last, and if it hits, you get to go and find as many Lord of Winds as you can out of your deck. If you've got 3 left, you go and find those. So this combo line is, I think, this is, people have been playing this since Welcome to Wraith. It's very exciting. It has the output damage that can be just massive and very scary for the opponent, because during that chain you also get to draw an extra card from a Gust Wave. Mugenshi itself is 5, Surging is 5, and then this Lord of Wind that goes and gets you a lot of resources to have a big attack, and then really importantly in a lot of matchups, allow you to shuffle back cards from your deck to fill your deck back up with really good reds. That's going to mean that you don't run out of damage through the game.
Yeah, absolutely. This is definitely the most popular combo line we see. Most decks, they will tend to kind of forego, the Rushing River line, the leg tap line. Sometimes, the head jab line is usually the first one to go. Like we talked about the Rushing River as well, but it seems like every ninja deck does kind of run the Surging line, especially in Katsu. I know Ira does not. But this line tends to be the most punishing, specifically because Surging Strike's kind of relationship to Whelming Gust Wave is really tough to deal with, because Whelming Gust Wave costs nothing, right? So if you're presented with a Surging Strike as the opposing player, you have to go, if they have a card in hand, right? You have to go, okay, do I block this? And if he has the natural, I'm in a really bad situation, right? The Whelming hits, he draws, and he keeps going. Or if he doesn't have it, then do I let this hit or block it? And then if I don't block it, he can discard the Katsu's ability, go find the Whelming, and then that's just huge value as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very, very difficult. And, of course, Ira, because it's the Lord of Winds of Katsu specialization, and the Mugenshi as well, actually, Ira tends to not be playing just the starter. But most Katsus will. I have seen, Katsus who have omitted to play this for a lot more low to the ground aggressive deck with belittles and things like that. But this is the traditional core of the Katsu deck, whether it be aggro or control, because of how you can craft this state with the combo pieces. Move on to Hurricane Technique. So Hurricane Technique is the end piece of the kick line alongside Blackout Kick. So, the leg line is your damage line, right? This is where you can output some really massive damage for low cards and low resources. So you've got Leg Tap, that's the starter one with Go Again, into the Rising Knee Thrust, which is again a 0 cost, and for red, once it's comboed, deals 5 damage. So 4 plus 5. Blackout Kick as a red can deal 7 on the combo. So you're looking at 16 damage just off 3 cards there. So a lot of damage that you can output off this combo chain in particular, and probably, to be honest, is one of my favorites. I love Leg Tap. I love that it's a 4, it's still hard to block, and you play that dance that you kind of do with Surging Strike as well around, do you just have the Rising Knee if they block it, and if they don't block it, you get to go and find it, the Blackout Kick. So yeah, one of my favorite lines. And 2, I like that there's 2 end pieces here with the Blackout Kick, which is a lot more just pure damage orientated, and Hurricane Technique, which is more value orientated with that ability to come back to hand. I personally like playing both in ninja decks, and I'll play this line in basically every ninja deck because of the damage output.
Yeah, Hurricane Technique does really make your opponent think when they're wondering how to block. Obviously, if you're playing Katsu, the leg tap makes it really easy to usually go search for that Rising Knee, and if you have the Natty Hurricane in your arsenal, obviously it's going to come in for 5, it hits, it goes back to your hand, and you can play it again for another 4. So kind of a devastating combo to get hit by if you don't respect it or don't see it coming.
Yeah, 100%. I think we have to move on to one of the most probably defining cards of Flesh and Blood to date, to be honest. If you think about Ninja, it's Mask Momentum, it's Kodachi's, and it's Flick Flack, right, Brendan? You can't go past Flick Flack. This card has been so meta-defining in Blitz in the early iterations with Ira. It's one of the first cards you mentioned when you paired with Ira. The fact that this card, allows you to defend so well into go wide decks, which is, damage and on-hit effects is often Ninja's weakness, is their kryptonite because of the inability to block well, to defend well. Flick Flack gives you this way that you get so much value out of your cards from two cards from a defensive standpoint. You play red Flick Flack, you then defend with a combo card. That's 9 off 2 cards. So that's huge. So yeah, we've seen this card. It's also can't knock it past the fact that it's also 0 cost. So super efficient and works with Kodachis as well. So Flick Flack has been a massive part of every meta it's been in so far.
Yeah, I think that Flick Flack is the best class cycle or maybe cycle card in the game. The blue one is incredibly good, the yellow one is incredibly good, and the red one is incredibly good, all for different scenarios. And of course the blue being also a fantastic resource card for Katsu or Ira with those Kodachis. So this is one of the. I mean, I know if you play Blitz, you've obviously faced against this with Ira, and it's probably in the Blitz format. This is the most sort of meta constricting card. Most of Blitz is reacting. Like most of the Blitz meta is defined by reacting to Flick Flack. You don't see a lot of go wide strategies. People, even on Warrior, you can get valued. If you're playing Tall Warrior, you do end up, getting that go again. The block for 5 off the combo is a huge value. So yeah, Flick Flack, one of the strongest cards in Flesh and Blood for sure.
Yep. All right, last combo line in the Welcome to Wraith sort of side of it, and that's the head jab, open center, pounding gale, flusterfist line. So a really interesting line, and one that we haven't seen played very much. I'd say probably head jab we see played a reasonable amount because it's a 0 cost attack for 3 that says go again on it. So it just allows you to go wide and threaten, and it's fantastic with cards like Art of War. In terms of that combo line, though, I'd probably say we've seen for every 10 or 20 head jabs we've probably seen 1 open the center. Pounding gale we've seen because it's a 5 attack for 1 with combo, so it works really well on those Ira decks. But open center we've seen a lot less, and it's weird because in the rest of Ninja, you've got the kick line, which is very damage orientated. You've got the Magenchi, which is this big like combo, fill your deck back up, resource kind of based combo line, and then the head jab open the center line is about evasion. So the open the center is actually one of the best ways to trigger mask momentum. But your opponent can see it coming. That dominate isn't always actually going to be effective, and the damage for 2 resources is pretty low on a card that has restrictions with combo.
Yep, the Pounding Gale is just a very good value card. For something like Katsu, it's a great search trigger in most scenarios. So we do see a lot of Pounding Gales played without the kind of prerequisite line in the deck as well.
Yep. Let's go on to, Brendan, some of the, what we got with Crucible of War. I think there's a lot of cards we will kind of just mention but won't go much into because they probably haven't had as much of an impact in Ninja as maybe we would have thought. So Crucible, of course, introduced a lot of new Ninja cards to the class. And a lot of these cards probably haven't seen as much play as maybe people are expecting when the set first came out. I think we should start with... I think, Brendan, we should just start with the weapon, to be honest. We should just start with Zephyr Needle. I think it's one of the most sort of important cards that came out of Crucible War for the Ninja class. Basically exclusively for Ira at this stage. We see it a lot in Blitz, played into decks where people are not running defense reactions, sometimes into decks where they are running defense reactions and just making them have it. This card has seemed to do a lot for Ira and the Blitz meta, though.
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge card for Ira. It swung a lot of matchups that were kind of originally unfavorable. What's interesting is that as an Ira player, you will play this into decks that do have defense reactions. So you play this into Tall Warrior, you play this into Shane with the Husk. Like I've talked before, there are some Iras that swear by that because getting Husk turn 1 is fantastic, and the Shane player will take 3 to 4 damage and now can't block your Torrent Tempo for 6 or something like that. That being said, so like the reason why I play this into classes with defense reactions, like okay, if they break it on turn you shouldn't be swinging with it on turn 0 anyway. But if they break it on turn 1 or turn 2, it's bad, and that's kind of that can happen. But Ira can still do Ira things without the needle, and you can still win games. But if it doesn't get broken, coming in for 3 rather than 2 is so huge onto an opponent's life total, especially when you have something like Mask of Momentum. People are trying to stop Mask from triggering by throwing the armor in front of it, like Arcanine Skullcap, Braveforge Bracers, things like this. The needle has really just swung so many matchups into Ira's favor because the sheer amount of damage, I know it's just 1 point, but the sheer amount of damage is so significant in Blitz when you start at a 20 life total.
Yeah, it is. We'll talk about some of the other cards we've seen predominantly, and then some of the cards we haven't seen as much. So Flying Kick is a card we have seen a lot of, again, and just going back to Ira, and in these decks that want to go Kodachi threat. Flying Kick is fantastic because it's a threat for 7, although it does cost 2 resources. You do have Tunic to help you pay for that. So Flying Kick we've seen a lot of, and it's a card that it's just pure damage, right? Like it's just 2 for 7. It's just, and it blocks for 3. It's exactly sort of what you want in those Kodachi threat decks. Outside of that, Soulbeat Strike and Torrent of Tempo are the 2 combo starters for the, Rain Dance and Rushing River lines, respectively. We've seen a lot of the starters for the fact that they attack, they're efficient attacks. So the Soulbeat is 0 cost 4 attack at red that can get conditional go again. Same with Torrent of Tempo, 1 for 5 conditional go again. So we have seen those cards a lot. We haven't seen as much of the next line of the combos, so the Crane Dance and the Rushing River. Find Center, which is the end of that Crane Dance line, which is the combo card that can, after Crane Dance, can give you the Zen State token. This is a card that a lot of people, and a lot of Ninja players in particular, have played around with and feel that there's a lot of upside there and something there, but we haven't, today haven't seen as much of it. Brendan, did you want to talk about any of these combo lines and call out anything? I know one card in particular that you've played before you might want to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, it's just Heron's Flight. So back in the drone meta, when I said drone meta, I see Ira Drone versus Ira Drone, which was a very popular matchup. Heron's Flight was a pretty good card. I know some people, they had the idea that Heron's Flight wasn't good enough back then because your opponent could play around it and things like this. The issue with Heron's Flight is that you're going to go to fatigue every time you can pitch your deck, and just because Heron's Flight exists in your deck, your opponent can't go below like 6 or 7 life, and that's really hard to deal with. So in the worst case scenario is that Heron's Flight is a 0 for 3. So not too bad and can be an absolute win condition if your opponent dips to a low enough life total. So it was pretty good in the drone meta. Nowadays, not good enough. The Ira decks are way faster. And Heron's Flight just does not have the effect it did before. And the biggest consideration on that as well is that you're not going to cycle through your deck in most Ira mirrors.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think that kind of wraps it for crew. Let's just touch on some of the the really key and iconic generics that we see the Ninja decks using and utilizing to good effect. I think we can't really go past Razor Reflex as a starting point. It's a card that we've seen in most Ninja builds since, Welcome to Wraith. Obviously came out in Welcome to Wraith. Why is this card so good for Ninja, and why does it keep seeing played, Brennan?
Yeah, I mean, it's good for multiple reasons. Like, you can force a mass trigger when your opponent wants to just block the base damage on the attack. And what we'll see a lot as well is that you can kind of sort of build your own combo line. For instance, if you Arsenal the Whelming Gust Wave and you happen to draw a Razor and Mugenshi release, you can play the Whelming Gust Wave, Razor the Whelming, and then play the Mugenshi and kind of continue down that line. So just been a really effective card for decks like Katsu for that reason, because you can really utilize the Katsu ability off of Razor Reflex and kind of build your own combo. Like I said, in Ira, Razor Reflex is really in that deck to deal with Kano, no other reason. Razor's actually a pretty bad card for Ira, which it's hard to say that because when you have it played against you, like, oh, this sucks. But trust me, if you could have more sort of leg tap-esque cards in your deck, you'd probably do it. The issue is that Kano really keeps you in check, and Iras have responded to that by adding the double Razor Reflex, because this card, double Razor Reflex, is really hard for Kano because they're essentially almost never overblock something. So if you see it early in the game, the Kano is essentially starting on 9 life. It's pretty rough for them.
Yeah, oh, definitely. One card I really want to talk about because I think it's, since it came out, has seen mixed amounts of play, but I think it's pretty staple in most, especially aggressive Ninja builds now, and that's Art of War. That card, I guess, in that Crucible, Arcane, Rising meta, Art of War helped transform the Ninja deck from primarily either a mid-range or control deck into a really low-to-the-ground aggro deck. A big part of that is the Art of War's ability to probably add 3 to sometimes 4 damage over the turn, with also allowing you to find another attack action or a way to pitch to Katsu. It actually, what it does in those aggro Katsu decks in Classic Constructed is just give you a lot of ways to turn excess blues into gas, or to dig into other cards, or to find your 0 cost and just add that damage across as well. You're very, very rarely using the go again because your cards mostly naturally have go again. but it can help you out of spots as well where you draw these hands of multiple combo cards, and combo cards are pretty trash by themselves, right? Without the starter, those are underrate cards. A Wami Gust Wave Red is a 3 attack with no other text, so without the combo piece. So Art of War has been such an important card for those ninja decks, and I think it's what gives those aggro decks a lot of their strength.
Yeah, the only exception to the underrate, like you talked about, is Fluster Fist and Pounding Gale.
Yes.
In my opinion, those are great combo cards that aren't going to be starters or anything like that. But I see your Art of War and I raise you a Plunder Run, so I think that this card has had more of an effect on Katsu. Came out in Arcane Rising, obviously. Katsu playing playing a Plunder Run out of Arsenal, getting that +2 is great, but that draw trigger is really, really annoying. Because more cards in Katsu's hand, the more gas he has, the longer he can go. So if you already are going to present 3 to 4 attack actions on the combat chain, or maybe 2 to 3, this Plunder Run makes all of them must block, which is either impossible or incredibly inefficient for your opponent. Yep. So Plunder Run is a kind of a big winner that Katsu got from, or just Ninja in general got from Arcane Rising.
Yeah, and it's 0 cost as well at that, right? So I actually really like the Blue Plunder Run. I think it's the best deck for Blue Plunder Run. And that, it's a resource card that costs 0, so you can always get rid of its Katsu. Or, if you do draw excess blues, or you're left with this card, you draw it off of a hit trigger at the end of the turn, say have a mask trigger. It's still a great arsenal card. It's still going to probably draw you a card on a 5-card hand because of, how wide you go, and your opponent not being able to block everything. And if they do, they're probably not blocking it efficiently. So, I really like Red and Blue Plunder Run in any aggressive ninja deck. I'm definitely playing 6 copies of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, let's just briefly touch. We already talked about the needle. We've talked about the Kodachis and just the effect of what that has on mask and the way people block. There is, of course, a third weapon, Edge of Autumn. Do we need to talk about this at all, Brendan?
No. It's a style weapon to use. Hopefully, maybe one day it'll do something, but now, there's no reason to use it.
Yeah. All right. I want to move into the types of, archetypes for Ninja, and we've already talked around all of these, but just want to kind of sum them up and put them into one piece here. So, really, what we have with Ninja, between primarily Ira and Katsu, but also Benji is there as well, is you've got aggro builds, you've got control builds, and you've got mid-range builds. So I just wanted to quickly talk about what the game plans of these decks are. Brendan, just the kind of the ethos of these decks, and I'll start with the aggro deck. So it really is all about, 0 cost attacks, very efficient attacks, going wide. So we'd already talked about the generics, Plunder Run and Art of War, fantastic here. Head jabs, Scar for Scar, you'll often even see in these decks as just another 0 cost attack for 4. The Fluster Fist is 0 cost attack for 4, doesn't care about the combo. Primarily, Leg Tap is your key combo line, but you're probably playing Surging Strike as well, just because of the power of that. Mask obviously best friend. Ancestral Empowerments tend to be in this deck as well, which, just filters and cycles, and gives you that +1, and is a 0 cost that you can ditch to Katsu. Yeah, the deck's trying to get a Katsu hit, trying to get a mask hit, and just trying to go wide and really take the initiative and keep the tempo through the whole game. What about control, Brendan?
Yeah, so control is pretty much all about Flick Flack. So Flick Flack is just a value card. You'll likely be playing a lot of combo cards to utilize Flick Flack, get that extra bonus on the block, and just sort of outvalue your opponent throughout the course of a game. And honestly, Flick Flack is the cornerstone of the deck. I would argue that another cornerstone of the deck is Drone of Brutality. We have seen some success of Ninja Control without Drone of Brutality. That was most recently in the PTI event. That being said, I think that was more an issue on the opponent's side rather than that deck actually being a strong pick. Because without, Katsu's just really good, with Drone of Brutality about playing towards a fatigue strategy, because the Kodachis obviously start to become serious issues towards the latter part of the game. Your opponent will have to start blocking them out of hand, and they're going to leak more cards out of the deck faster than you are. So without that, I don't see control being very prevalent anymore, although you may see it at an upcoming event because of its sort of early success in the Monarch meta.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. And I think we talk about control. We've also got mid range as well there, which is a hybrid of these aggro style decks and these control decks where you're probably either looking to do one or two things, which is either be either a control deck or an aggro deck, depending on the matchup. So siding your cards in your deck to fit the matchup, or you're kind of trying to do a bit of a hybrid, which I think is probably the hardest one to execute of all of these, is try and be a bit aggressive, but also have flick flacks in your deck, but also have Art of Wars, things like this. I actually think it's a pretty bad strategy because you don't know what you're going to draw in the first cycle of your deck. So you could be taking the tempo on turns 1 and 2 with really aggressive lines and trading some life to keep that tempo, and then all of a sudden you draw 2 flick flack, Art of War, and I don't know, a blue card, and your tempo's completely gone. Your opponent didn't actually have a hand to come back at you with because they've just blocked everything, and now it's back to you on your turn, and you have nothing to do on your turn. So trying to be a hybrid of these decks, although it sounds, like a great idea, I can do the best of both worlds. Usually what ends up happening is that you do the worst of both worlds, where you draw awkward hands that don't do anything, and you can't actually execute your game plan because, a few turns into it, you draw the wrong combination of cards, you draw the wrong side of your deck in that matchup, and you can't do anything. So I think trying to be in one of these lanes of aggro control, or if you want to be mid-range, you need to be able to flex, depending on the matchup, I think.
Yeah, I think mid-range kind of comes down to how you define it, right? So in my definition, aggro is Katsu decks that play these things like, they play like the full belittle package with Minnowism, as well as Razor Reflexes, Ancestral Empowerments, all these kind of bonuses, and they're very, very low to the ground. In my opinion, like mid-range, or the way that I describe it, mid-range is actually just kind of all about on-hit triggers. So I would describe Kieran's deck, where he won the charity tournament, as being mid-range, right?
Yep.
Because, as with the aggressive list, I see that as the Art of War package with these Minnowism, just kind of doing these like massive combo lines and running very, very few blues. Where I would describe also the current Ira deck as a mid-range deck. It has come from a control deck now to mid-range. Utilizes Flick Flack and a large base of combo cards to value the opponent. But things like red leg taps, push the points, these are like cornerstones of a mid-range deck, right? It's doing both. So that's how I define it. And I think that the strategy can be effective. But yeah, it depends, right?
So I think that's a good example of what a mid-range deck should be trying to do, right? Like, it has cards that defend well but don't hamper your strategy, for instance. Whereas if you take that current Ira deck and you start to put in, 2 Sink Below, 2 Fae Scene, but you're still trying to be aggressive and present on-hit triggers and have go-wide turns, you're going to draw hands where you draw multiple defense reactions, and that's going to punish you a lot. Flick Flack is so powerful that, to be honest, you can take that risk and blitz that Ira deck wants to do a bit of defending. That's fine. But when you start to add in all these other cards and you're trying to really split your shift across 2 different things, it really makes it hard to enact a game plan. If your game plan is to block with a couple of cards, attack with a couple of cards, then you're kind of fine to have those. But as soon as it gets to be, well, I mostly want to be aggressive, but I want to, when I draw the Flick Flag, be able to be defensive. That's okay. Once you start to be like, well, I've also got these other defense reactions and need a hedge, you're gonna start to hamper your game plan.
Yeah, awesome. Hayden, why don't you let's kind of break down the core of how to play the deck. So starting out with how to structure turns.
Yeah, one thing I did want to just touch on before we move on to that is ratios of resources in these archetypes that we just talked about. So for me personally, what I find in the aggressive decks is that you want somewhere between 12 to 15 blues, and I would say that 15 sort of blue mark is where you're starting to get into these mid-range decks. I know in Kieran's build, I think he had access to 18 blues, but was playing 15 most of the time in that charity event, which fits with, having the Surging Strike lines in this. He wants to get a blue basically every hand if he can. So that's where that 15 comes in. A lot of the aggressive decks can run off 12 because you are also playing some yellows, and some hands you're not going to need any blue, to be honest. You're just going wide with head jabs and line strikes, things like that. In the control decks, where you're looking at a mix of defensive options, efficient threats, and then blues is basically what you're looking at there. That's what you want your deck to be. Probably you're looking around 20 to 24 blues, around 26 to 28 reds in those control decks, and then some yellows to fill that out. And you really want to focus on your ratio of defensive options, threats that can tag onto the end of a Kodachi, the Kodachi lines, and then defensive cards, so your defense reactions is what that control deck's looking to do with your Flick Flacks, etc. And you've really got to consider, if you're playing Flick Flack, your density of combo cards. There's always this urge to be like, well, I'm going to shed some of these combo cards that aren't as good for really good efficient generics or non-combo cards, but that can make your Flick Flacks a lot worse. So that's just some considerations to think about in deck building.
Yep.
And sorry, just the last one as well is think about your combo starters. So you need to have a good ratio of the combo starters as well. If you are playing, three League Tap red, but then you're playing 3 red Rising Knee Thrust, 3 yellow Rising Knee Thrust, Blackout Kick, and Hurricane Technique. Well, you've got a lot of cards that are on the end of the chain, but you only have 3 ways to start that chain. So you're going to draw a lot of these combo cards, but not a lot of the starters, and your hands are going to be quite bad because of it. As you said before, apart from, as you pointed out, the third in the chain, the rest, the middle one chain is underrate. So the Whelming, the Rising Knee Thrust, open the center.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to go ahead and take us into our first point here.
Yes.
How to play it. That's going to be probably one of the most important things, specifically when playing Katsu, but now in the current iteration of Ira, and that's going to be playing 5-card hands. So, playing the Ninja deck, like we talked about a bit earlier as well. So let's pretend like we're on Katsu. Having that arsenal to make your opponent. So I think this is also kind of like an inverse of Kano, right? The less opponent you present to the less information you present to your opponent, so the more cards you have in hand, you have an arsenal, the more they have to question, does he have it, right? Because we call this, like when playing against Katsu, we call it the natty, right? So you just draw, the Surging Strike, the Whelming Gust Wave, and then the so I was blanking, the Mugenshi release in all caps. So that's always a possibility. So when you're facing an opponent and you present them Kodachi Surging Strike and you have 3 cards in hand, 1 in arsenal, they honestly have to do like a risk assessment right there. It's just like, does he just have the combo straight up? Because if they block the Surging Strike, they would have to commit 2 cards to the Whelming, most likely, or a card in armor, and then there's almost no way they're blocking the Mugenshi after them. They get hit by Mugenshi, it's really, really bad for them. So playing these 5-card hands, having these large combat chains, and stringing together these combos as Katsu is super, super important. That being said, if we do move over to Blitz and we talk about Ira, the arsenal is one of the most important things you can do with Ira, specifically because you do need a big Snapdragon Scaler's turn to usually win the game, and you're going to be doing that by sitting out, an E-Strike in Arsenal, sitting out that leg tap in Arsenal, and then also Flick Flack is the ideal target for your arsenal, right? It is going to be that follow-up defense reaction, and then, if they do come in with another Go-Again card, you have the follow-up combo from hand. Your deck is stacked full of combos. But I think the biggest mistake that you can make when playing, some of the more popular iterations of Katsu now and of the kind of ever-popular standard Ira deck is that if you play without an arsenal, you're going to be playing a very, very hard game. It's pretty much categorically incorrect. And I say this because it can feel like the correct decision, because you might want to feel like, I'm just going to play out my hand every single turn and present as much damage as possible. And I don't think that's what the Ninja class wants to do.
No, I mean, you got to think that the best way to think about this is that your cards have synergies, right? So many of your cards are synergistic together, whether that be, of course, the very obvious ones of your combo cards. So Whelming Gust Wave and a Surging Strike, for instance. But there's also a lot more subtle ways that you have this, these synergistic interactions. Something like an Ancestral Empowerment with your Ninja cards, Art of War, of course, with attack actions. So having this 5th card as a way to set up this 5-card hand actually not only makes it harder for your opponent to make decisions and block and have more damage on that turn, it actually makes the rest of your cards probably better. So if I take an example, you come in Kodachi, leg tap, and then you use your 3 resources, your opponent blocked the second Kodachi, you're not going to get a Master Trigger. The last card in your hand is a red Whelming Gust Wave. If you play that card down right there and there, you're cashing in for 3 damage probably, or a card from their hand. The opportunity cost of that is that card in your arsenal, say if you draw a Surging Strike next turn, you're trading off that opportunity to have a 4 attack with an on-hit effect. So playing with those 5-card hands is super important for for things like that. And there's so many cards that in that deck that you want to arsenal. You've got the combo starters. You've got the second piece of the combo chain, like the Whelmings and the Rising Knee Thrust, that you're more than happy to arsenal and then draw that combo starter. That makes your next hand so much better. You're fine to put the reactions in there. Art of Wars into arsenal means that you could start with a full hand and pick how you want to craft that Art of War. Even we talked about Blue Plunder Run before, Red Plunder Run. These cards as well. So generally you want to be playing on 5-card hands, and often you actually chain 5-card hands. You're not even going 5-card hands, blow it all out, draw back up to 4, find an arsenal, go back again the subsequent turn. So you go every second turn. You're actually often going 5-card hand, come in, have 1 card left in hand, either because you've driven a Master Trigger or Whelming or whatever it is, arsenal that last card. or you even just end up with a card in your next hand that would be better from Arsenal, like a second piece of the combo. So playing off 5 card hands, I think can't stress enough, is super important, especially for these mid-range and I think mid-range mostly, aggressive as well, and then as you said, these Ira decks because of things like Snapdragon Scalers and Flick.
Yep. It's just funny because I think we talk about 5 card hands every time, like it's exclusive to a hero, but I think that there doesn't exist a hero in Flesh and Blood that doesn't want to play 5 card hands.
Yeah,
which is kind of funny.
That's so true. I would say with Katsu, like I can't stress it enough that what you're losing by not playing off 5 card hands is so significant. In other decks, let's take like Rhinar for instance, right? Like your 5 card hands are important to set up big turns, but they're not important to play out your game plan like every turn of the game. Whereas with Katsu, in a lot of these Katsu builds, or even in some Ira builds, it feels like you almost exclusively want to have 5 card hands to be playing into.
Yep, absolutely. So I think probably the second most important thing in Ninja is we're going to circle back to that equipment, the Mask of Momentum. So forcing Mask of Momentum triggers. This basically makes your third attack action on hit on my combat chain a must block. If your opponent does block it, it's pretty much bad news every single time. So that being said, there's a lot of ways to facilitate this. It's either with the Kodachis. We talk about the surging strike line. A popular way to do that is Kodachi surging strike and then follow up with the whelming. You have double hit trigger on the whelming. And if you do have the Tunic resource, I think it is usually better to go Kodachi, then the surging. So you're surging as you're on hit, and then you come with a whelming, put it on hit on another card on that combat chain. So really, really strong card, and it's Mask Momentum is one of the most important cards in your deck, and you have to be playing around it. It's very much a resource, and if blocking with it early or just not really utilizing the ability to its full extent is probably one of the biggest traps.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to talk about, you just spoke there about setting up chains where you go Kodachi into combo starter. There is a way to play these lines where often actually playing the combo starter first is one of the strongest things you can do. Let's take a Surging Strike, for instance. If you pitch blue, play Surging Strike, and you have a 5 card hand, say, your opponent is forced into a really, really difficult situation. I think basically almost 100% of the time, unless they have really good defense reactions and armor up, they're not going to be able to block that Surging Strike. Because if they do, now what they're opening themselves up to is they're probably having to 2-card block that, almost certainly, unless they've got strong equipment up. Now you can start your chain again with the Mask Trigger. So then you can Kodachi into threat, or you can Kodachi into 2, another combo starter, whatever it is. And basically, if they block out that surging, yes, you might not be able to go find the whelming, but if you just have the whelming naturally, now they're now going to have to commit another card minimum plus an equipment, if not 2 cards, and that could be their hand gone over the first 2 cards you've played. And if you're playing off a 5 card hand, you've still got a resource up plus 2 cards to play from. So playing that combo starter first is often a very strong thing to do. It can be dependent on whether you have the second piece of the combo, as Brendan said, Kodachi, and then like a Surging Strike or a Leg Tap on the second if you want them to block it. Because you already have the piece as a good way, because they're incentivized to block the second part of a chain. They block that out. It's okay. You already have the second piece of the combo chain.
Mm-hmm. And lastly, I want to talk about how control will generally play here. So control is pretty much universally predicated off, defending with defense reactions for value, but be it Flick Flack or, an immovable from Arsenal or something like this. And then it will play with less cards in hand than a normal Ninja deck, and it will most of the time play Kodachi threat, and it's just almost pure damage. So it's value block damage, and you do that with Kodachi threat, which obviously leads back into our last point, which is it can draw a card off of your mask. So let's say you do have just 2 cards in hand, Kodachi threat. If they let it hit, you now mask trigger, draw Arsenal, and control decks are all about value in Flesh and Blood, and this is exactly what the Ninja deck is trying to do in that sense.
It's the best way to look at. I think control is the easiest to understand when you come into Flesh and Blood, and it's just a lot of math. Basically, it's just a lot of very basic positive negative on damage and an on hit effect that can net you so much value, and your opponent. So there's a defense reaction you draw off that. Your opponent is now behind on a turn where they're trying to come and present you with damage.
Yeah, right. Absolutely.
We're going to move into, how to win with Katsu, Ira, and Benji. One of the first things I want to talk about is Katsu specific. You'll notice I'm talking a lot more about Katsu, Brendan about Ira. That's just our play experience with these 2 ninja heroes. Katsu, a big thing you need to know is the damage in your deck. You need to know the cards that are left in your deck and what damage you have to output. There is actually, you have Kodachis, yes, and they're very good, efficient weapons, but you have a limited amount of damage in your deck, especially in these Katsu decks where you're, throwing cards to Katsu's ability to go and find stuff. Every time you do that, if you're throwing, say, a red card, that's damage out of your deck. So you do need to be aware of this. It's not as much of a thing in the current past two formats for Ninja to be fatigued, but welcome to Wraith, even Arcane Rising, we did see Ninjas often run out of damage because people could block them out efficiently, or they had to defend at some point in the game, which took their total damage output down from the deck. So it is important to know that. And also the reason to know the cards left in your deck is because if you are trying to set up these combo chains, these combo lines, or try and Katsu to go and find them, you need to make sure you actually have them left in your deck. If you've already played out your 3 red Wyoming Gustwave, well, you're not going to be able to go and find one off a Katsu, and your opponent's going to know that as well by looking through your graveyard. So all that extra information is just really important. If you come with a Surging Strike and you don't have a red Wyoming Gustwave left in the deck, your opponent can feel pretty confident that they probably can just one card block the Wyoming Gustwave if you have the yellow or the blue. So it is really important to know first of all, what's in your deck to start with, and then as the game goes on, what's left in your deck.
Yep, and then switching over to Ira, the ninja hero that is only available in Blitz. Ira is a great hero to start out on. It's pretty much the definition of the 80-20 rule in Blitz. You can achieve pretty much 80% proficiency on the deck very, very quickly. It's a great deck to start out on, but if you do want to stick time into it and master it, you can get to that 100%. You will be significantly better than other players that have not put in that much time, so it's a very rewarding deck to play in that sense. Ira's just a value deck in Blitz. It plays the Flick Flax. It also plays aggressive cards, so it's looking to defensively block with Flick Flax and then follow up with a combo card to block for 5. And then also come in with very, very large combat chains and a lot of damage using the Snapdragon Scalers. This could be E-Strike into Flying Kick, anything like this. Also, the leg tap line really helps facilitate that. And Ira's general game plan outside of defensively blocking or popping their Snapdragons to go big is to simply, and this kind of goes with the blocking, to be defensive on the opponent's turn and then come in with 2 cards. So it'd be like a Kodachi Pounding Gale or a Kodachi Command and Conquer, which does only take 2 cards, presents 8 damage and irrelevant on hit trigger. And yeah, Ira's just a hyper efficient deck in Blitz, and that's why it's so punishing.
Yeah. So want to just touch on Benji a bit. Poor little Benji. He's been a little bit forgotten through our pod today, through our Ninja deep dive. And look, to be honest, a big part of that is the fact that Benji just hasn't seen much play. But I do want to touch on, the way that I think if you are going to approach Benji and do want to play Benji, there's a lot of similarities between what you're trying to do with Ira and Katsu. That mask is still really important for the ninja class overall. There's a lot of evasion to Benji because of that hero ability. So low cost cards, low attack cards. You can have things like Life for Life Blue or Snatch Blue that get under that Benji effect and allow you to come in with an on-hit effect, which is really important. Is really strong as well. And then you can still have these big, end cards. So you can use your Kodachis, you can use these low-cost attacks with Go Again, even a blue Scar for a Scar, and then you can still hit them with a big, Blind Kick or whatever it is on the end of that chain and still threaten Mask really efficiently. So there's a lot of things that Benji probably has going for it that could be explored. The life total, difference is obviously a disadvantage in Blitz for sure. Just want to circle back to some really key things. We've kind of talked about all these facets and how to win. We kind of already talked about that as we talked about how the game plans execute, but just to recap on a few things, I want to go back to it. 5 card hands is super important. Utilize your arsenal to the fullest extent is really important for winning with Ninja. Attacking efficiently, so using your resources really efficiently during your turns is super important. Sometimes you're going to have a dead card left over. You need to work that out on your opponent's turn and then potentially be in with defending with that card. If you know that you're going to be able to force through an attack action hit, then that card might be one you keep to Katsu to keep your chain going. But it's really important to, as it is with any deck in Flesh and Blood, to be honest, play on your opponent's turn in terms of working out what you're going to do with your turn. But with Katsu, there's a few things you need to consider, and even with Ira, because of mask hits, right, that could change your dynamic and what could happen on your turn. So, that's really important. Yep. Any kind of overarching things you want to wrap up on this before we get into strengths and weaknesses of the class?
No, I think you hit all of them, but in kind of in classic class deep dive or 101, we are going a bit long. So with these strengths and weaknesses, Hayden, I'm just going to kind of let you go through them, and you're going to take the lead here.
Yep, and learning from Brendan 2 weeks ago, I've just taken a big swig of water to get myself ready for it. So, strengths. Ninja strengths. So Kodachi's one of your biggest strengths, whether it be limited through to what we're talking about today with Classic Constructed and Blitz. These weapons have consistently allowed the ninja deck to do a lot and appear well with your other biggest strength, which is of course the mask, which we've talked about. It is genuinely one of the strongest equipments in a vacuum. I said it already, but Skullbone, Crosswrap, and Scabskin Leathers and Mask. Those three are just outstanding in their abilities. They might not be as prevalent and strong because the rest of the class doesn't quite do what you want to do with it, but in a vacuum, those cards are just pretty ridiculous. One of the other strengths is it won't be clear what strategy you're on before the game starts. So your opponent's not necessarily going to know that in a Swiss rounds event, whether you're playing an aggro deck, a control deck, a mid-range deck, and they're going to have to make their setup decisions based on very little information other than you're playing Katsu or you're playing Ira. So that is a strength of the ninja class, is the flexibility. You have really big damage output that carry on hit effects, not just from Mask, but from the Katsu ability, from the combo cards themselves, and this makes it really difficult for your opponent to defend. If your opponent's deck doesn't defend well, they're probably already really behind because your on-hit effects are just so efficient with the cards plus the Mask. Those matchups just become so good for you. And you have access to some really great generics that work well in your deck. We talked about these: Plunder Run, Art of War, Razor Reflex, Scar for a Scar, even Snatch. These cards are good cards that work well in the ninja deck going wide. If we move on to weaknesses of the ninja class, there's definitely some of them. So a lot of your attacks defend for 2. The combo starters all defend for 2. In Welcome to Wrath, in Crucible, you've got some that defend for 3, but they don't have natural go again. So it makes you susceptible to other on-hit effect decks, from things such as Warrior, Bravo, and even Ranger to an extent as well. So that's where Warrior has been traditionally a really tough matchup because you just don't defend well, and they also have their own on-hit effects. If you draw, like a quad red hand or all blues, etc., your deck can blink. You can miss a turn, and that's when you give your opponent the opportunity to break and get back on the front foot to swing tempo. So naturally, Ninja with its draws can give your opponent the opportunity to gain the tempo back. This happens even in Blitz Ira as well. You don't draw a threat to go Kodachi threat. You draw like 2 blues, 2 defense reactions. Your opponent has a pretty off or setup turn, and then you can't put any pressure on. So this happens in both Classic and Blitz. In the aggro decks, you only have so much damage. We talked about this already, and people can run you out of it. It's less common now, but it does happen, so it is something to be aware of, and it is something that can happen. Next, your combo cards are just straight awful by themselves. Apart from, as we talked about, the third chain in the combo, so the Pounding Gales, the Cluster Fist, those cards, those cards are on rate, but your middle pieces are below rate and just terrible. They don't have go again. They're going to be really difficult for you to utilize. So you can draw these hands that are pretty bad. Crew and Monarch gave you something, but not as much as other sort of classes got. And it was rather than being additive to a lot of what Ninja was already trying to do, it was a lot more iterative. So what we saw in Crucible with Fine Center, Heron's Flight, the Flutter Force, these different combo lines so far, or at least what we've seen so far, are very different to what the traditional Ninja decks have been trying to do, and haven't really helped what we've had. The exception of Monarch, that we got Belittle and Minimalism for a lot lower to the ground option of an aggro deck. So yeah, that's strengths, weaknesses, Brendan. Let's talk about some matchups. I reckon what we'll do here is I'll take the Classic match, you'll take the Ira side of it with Blitz, and we'll just kind of rattle through them. Apologies, but we're not going to talk about Benji in this matchup side of it. It's just going to be Katsu and Ira. Okay, let's start with Prism. So in Classic Constructed, this is a pretty tough matchup. You can... We've actually played this matchup on camera, and I've seen this matchup played a lot by people testing it. It is a tough matchup. I've seen Jason Long, who's a very well-known Ninja player, trying to tech to beat this matchup, but just the output from Prism and the damage it can do is massive. Prism is card hungry, so when it needs to block these on-hit effects, it makes it really difficult for Prism to execute its plan sometimes. But if you get on the front foot as a Prism deck, it often doesn't matter. Your damage is so high. Katsu can't block your on-hit effects, which is so important. Herald of Erudition is just punishing for Katsu. You might be able to block the first one using your mask or a piece of equipment with a flick flack. But after that, it's going to be very difficult. So, yeah, I would say this is one of the tougher matchups in Classic Constructed. What about in Blitz, though?
Yeah, Blitz, there's not too much to talk about. Prism is a very linear deck in Blitz. That being said, Ira does tend to just straight outvalue it. But the Prism player, or the Prism deck can just high roll, and if it does, you will lose the game. So the Herald of Eruditions with pummels into Phantasma Class and Wartune Herald, yes, that combo does happen. If you get hit by that, you're going to be in a bad spot. But generally, Ira will just outvalue the Prism in the course of the Blitz game.
Yeah, and just to circle back on the classic piece, I had spoken mostly about an aggro or mid-range deck there. In the control piece, I think it's maybe a bit better for you. You have these abilities to have these defense reactions, and if your opponent doesn't know you're on the control plan, they're probably siding out all their auras against you, and that's going to make it very difficult for them to win. So, did just want to point that out. Moving on to Reiner. So, from the mid-range aggressive side, this is one of your best matchups. But as a control deck, it's potentially one of your worst. And the reason for that is that Reiner doesn't deal well with explosive go-wide decks. Defense reactions and things like that are a big cost to them on like a claws plan. And on a club plan, the romping club plan, they can obviously have, value turns, but it's generally too slow and you just deal too much damage in too much of an efficient way. Versus control, on the other hand, though, that's when, their power of the Intimidate comes into effect. Intimidate is really good against decks that want to defend with a couple of cards and attack with a couple of cards. So you can take their whole hand, and then they can't come back at you with good 4 or 5 card hands. Sorry, the ninja, if you're the control ninja, you can't come back at them with good 4 or 5 card hands. So that's the difficulty in that matchup. What about in Blitz?
In Blitz, Ira is favored for sure. So your top priority, I think, is going to be putting a defense reaction in Arsenal. This is going to help you deal with barraging beatdown turns, so they don't get that barraging bonus. That being said, Ira does have a lot of defense reactions, the full flick flag package, and usually the sink below, so you should be covered. But yeah, Ira is favored, but Reinar can obviously high roll you with back-to-back Bloodish Bellows or 2 in a turn, all this kind of stuff, intimidate your whole hand, hit you for your 20 plus, right? Take your whole life total. That happens, but over the course of a larger sample size, I think Ira has the advantage.
Yeah, you just want to keep them on the back foot, right, and having to defend with cards, and there's only so much defending, or like they can only try and swing the tempo of the game so many times, and if you're consistently sort of hitting them with, Kodachi, maybe a leg tap threat once, and then just Kodachi threat, and you have that defense reaction to fall back on, you're going to be able to navigate your way through that game. They're going to have very big turns to punish you, and you're going to have to not be able to come back with damage on at least one of those turns. So it seems to be tough. Right, Dorinthia, I already talked about this, but in Classic Constructed, especially if you're on the aggro or the mid-range versions of Katsu, this tends to be probably your toughest matchup. You can't defend well into them with a lot of your combo starters and 2 defense cards and lack of defense reactions. And they have really strong on-hit effects with the Dawnblade. If you do try and defend these, which sometimes you need to because of Warrior's Valors or their non-attack actions, then they get to the opportunity to blow you out with their attack reactions. So it is very difficult. To be honest, the way that you need to play this matchup as that sort of more mid-range or aggressive Katsu is to race them. You need to get on the front foot, get your on-hit effects in their face, force these combo chains, present mouse triggers, just make them defend. Dorinthia can play pretty well off 2 cards, but if you consistently are only giving them 1 or 2 cards to play with, they're going to find it hard to present you with on-hit effects that you care about. So that's basically how you need to play that matchup and construct it. On the control side, it tends to be a bit better for the ninja player. You can obviously have all these defense reactions. You can just value them with Kodachis, and unless the Dorinthia player knows how to play that matchup really well and is able to set up their deck for a late game, then you're going to be in a pretty good spot. They also have to probably know that you're on that plan from the start to be able to set that up.
Yep, so in Blitz, this is probably one of the most iconic matchups of Blitz we've had since the format came out. And the real question out there is who has the 55, who has the 45? And people will not agree. Ira can win, right? Ira, you have the defense reactions to deal with Dorinthia. Dorinthia can also just straight run over you because Tall Warrior is an extremely punishing deck to block against, and Ira does tend to do a bit of blocking. So, yeah, this is the closest it gets to a 50-50. I've played both sides of it extensively. I remember at the end of Season 1 skirmish, I was just on Warrior because I was facing almost exclusively Warriors, and when I was playing Warrior, I would win 95+% of my mirrors, and if, I felt very comfortable there rather than if I was on Ira, I felt like I was going closer to like a 55-45 matchup. So I've played the Warrior, and I think, it's about as close as it gets to 50-50, and you're just going to need a lot of experience to win this match.
Yeah, it's so funny that you say that people are on either side of the 55-45, and then you played Dorinthia because you felt like you had a much better matchup into the mirror. So I was one of those people on the other side of that, right, where I wanted to play Ira into Dorinthia. I felt like I had a very good matchup. So I think it's so player dependent in that, and I think you're so right. That's why people can't decide, because it's skill dependent, to be honest, in that matchup, the way you play it. And I don't think it's straightforward. But anyway, enough about that. What about Ira? Obviously, Blitz specific.
Blitz specific. So the Ira Mirror, one of the highest skill matchups in the game, or as it used to be. So when we had Drone Ira, that was the highest level of Blitz that you could play. That time has come and gone. So you're probably thinking, oh, it's a control deck with Drone of Brutality. Why does it take any skill? Because every card in that deck matters, and literally everything you do is a relevant choice to winning or losing the game. Every single card is a resource and incredibly important because they were pretty much, full mirror matches with the list. That time has come and gone. Now we have much more aggressive Ira lists that are running leg taps and Yellow Rising Knees and sometimes a Hurricane technique, and then the Razor is pretty standard now. So you can just get straight up run over by another Ira deck. You can not draw your Flick Flax, they can draw their Flick Flax, and they can just have a huge 15 damage turn with their Snapdragon when you don't get the cards to do such a thing. So the Ira matchup has significantly decreased in its sort of skill requirement. That being said, it is still one of the most skill-intensive matchups in the game, and if you are the better Ira, you will win drastically more than the player that is of lower skill. Sorry, I'm something over.
I agree, and I was just going to say that my opinion is that basically Ira at the moment is a better deck to be playing than Katsu and Benji. It's simpler, you get a lot more play, I think, and because of that +1. And the Flick Flax, you don't want to be playing Katsu into Ira or Benji into Ira, is the way I see it right now. Could change, but Kano. So we're not seeing a lot of Kano in Classic Constructed, but I think if you are playing into it on the Ninja side, if you're playing the more aggressive or mid-range deck, it's just a straight race. Ninja's favored here. You have these really big go-wide turns that it's going to be hard for Kano to deal with. They need to try and find turn to take off and swing tempo at some point. And unless as the Ninja player you have a lot of bricks or you have some really awkward turns, it's going to be tough for Kano to do that. So I think it's Ninja favored, but you can lose to some variants. I think this is a good one to talk about though from a Blitz perspective, where we see a lot of Ira and Kano.
Yeah, very iconic now. So as we move into Skirmish Season 2 and Dorinthia has sort of fallen out of the format, is sort of the Kano versus Ira. That being said, who has the edge? Nobody will agree here. Everyone who doesn't play Kano is going to say Kano has the edge because A, they don't understand how to play the deck, or 2, it feels bad when they lose the deck because they don't actually interact with it because Kano plays Solitaire. How it actually comes down to it is that I've played both ends. I've lost to Kanos as Ira, and I've done it plenty of times, and I still feel that Ira probably has the edge here. Ira has to do so little, so much less, has to draw so much more average than Kano does. Kano has to play way tighter. It takes a much more experienced player to beat Iras consistently on Kano, and really all Ira has to do is draw the correct cards and not play like a monkey. That being said, I do think that Ira is slightly favored, but player skill, especially on the Kano side, not really on the Ira side, is incredibly important to this matchup. So it may be more favored to Ira because, the level of the amount of time it takes to become good at Kano is much more than on Ira.
Yeah, it's funny we're talking about this Blitz formats and the skill level, but that is the game of Flesh and Blood, right? The skill has so much play into it. We won't get into Monarch Constructed, but in that matchup particularly, I think it can range from anywhere from like 65-35 on either side, depending on maybe less so on the Kano side, depending on the player skill. Anyway, Brendan, Bravo, Guardian. One of my personal favorite Classic Constructed matchups, to be honest, is Katsu versus Bravo. It's a classic from back in the day from Welcome to Wraith. In the early days, it was always very heavily Ninja favored, as Brendan alluded to earlier. Spoke about, there was a lot of defense reactions in these Bravo decks, and Ninja just got to like go wide and just outvalue with Kodachi and just always be presenting mass triggers, that meant that the Bravo player, all they could really do was swing with hammer, which just kind of did nothing. That's really changed. Players on Bravo really figured out how to play that matchup. I think, that would be Kale McCreath would have led that sort of charge. But now really how this matchup plays is that Bravo tries to actually get on the front foot and present a lot of really relevant crush effects. So, they're trying to get Spinal Crush through. They're trying to swing tempo and then go like multiple crushes in a row. There's, new cards from Crucible even, like the Crush of the Weeks, etc. So they've got cards that they can try and push through. It's Crush of the Week or Chokeslam, the one that doesn't let you play a card with 3 or less attack.
That is Crush the Week.
Crush the Week, yeah. So there is ways that Bravo can get on the front foot and present damage. And so for the Ninja player, it really is about trying to not let up that tempo. And that's again where those 5-card hands become so important, because if you run out a 5-card hand into Bravo and then you end your turn with just 4 cards, the Bravo is probably in a spot where potentially they're not worried about how you can attack them on that turn. So say you could play a 5-card hand, the Bravo has to be pretty defensive, and then you pass with 4 cards. And you draw up and your 4 cards are, pretty average. You don't have that 5th card to help, make your hand better. The Bravo can, play their 1 card that they have, become with Hammer or make a Surging Strike and pass, or Arsenal to set up. And then on your turn, if you're only able to present them sort of like 7, 8, 9 damage, they can probably take that and use that turn to swing the tempo. So 5-card hands really, again, important into Bravo. From the Blitz side, have you played this matchup from an Ira perspective much, Brendan?
Yeah, I've played it quite a few times and quite consistently as the Ira deck has changed. So this one is slightly interesting because Ira Drone was massively favored versus Bravo. You could just fatigue them out. Bravo really couldn't keep up. That being said, as Drone of Brutality has been banned, this is a matchup that I think that a lot of Bravos would say is, more 50-50 now, or maybe even slightly favored to Bravo. That being said, in my experience playing it, I find myself winning very consistently as the Ira player. I don't know if that's because of the sample size of Bravo players there is, or the kind of players that it attracts, but right now it does seem very Ira favored in a sort of just straight statistical game to game sense. But in theory, I do think that Bravo has a decent fighting chance.
Yep, I completely agree. So I played a lot of Bravo in the end of Skirmish Season 1, and having some discussions with much better Bravo players than myself, just working out how to play that matchup. And it got to the point where I actually felt that I was favored into Ira to become draw dependent, but you do have to play super, super tight. So I would say, it's a very close matchup, and the Bravo player can win, but the Ira player kind of has the momentum in their favor most of the time. All right, Azalea in Classic Constructed, it can be a lot of a race effect in this. They can't deal with your on-hit effects. You can't deal with theirs. So, I think if you're the aggro deck, you're favored because your on-hit effects are generally just wider and better than what Azalea can put on you. If you're playing the more mid-rangey or even into control builds, it can be a little bit difficult for you potentially. They're able to take a bit more time to set up these arrows and things like that, and set up their deck for late game with take aims and big dominate turns, which is going to be tough for you. So I think it can move around that kind of sort of 40-60 mark, depending on which build you're playing on Ninja. In Blitz, I'm sure you probably haven't played this matchup as much. There doesn't seem to be as much to say.
I have played it so much, you have no idea, because of our mutual friend who is obsessed with meme decks and Azalea. So I've actually played this matchup over 50 plus times. Like, not even kidding, I played this matchup so much because I had a friend who was obsessed with making this deck work, and I entertained that. So this matchup is not even close. Like, Azalea is in such a bad position, and Ira is so ridiculously favored. I remember for a experiment, we decided to make, in our minds, make all of his attacks have 1+ attack, all of his ranger cards. He still lost. Like, it's a really, really bad matchup for Azalea. Flick Flack is devastating. They can't go wide. They have to go tall. And even then, you just prioritize putting that defense reaction arsenal, and you just slap them up. It's not even close.
Yeah. No, I the couple of matchups I've played as well, it felt basically unwinnable for Azalea. Unfortunately, sorry, Azalea players. Viserai, so in Class Constructed, the traditional big sort of OTK decks that we've seen in the past, Katsu love to play into. You just smash them with that aggro mid-range build and just keep peppering them, and they just, to be honest, often they just run out of cards to be able to block with. And also a lot of the cards block for 2, the Rune Chant creators, etc. So matchup felt pretty good. Control could be a bit more difficult. However, let's get on to Blitz, because this is much more interesting. is the Viserai OTK decks into Ira.
Yeah, so it is the opposite of interesting because it's basically an auto loss for Ira unless the Viscera is a total potato, which tends to happen because I don't know what kind of sadist plays OTK Viscera at a Blitz event because for me that's the opposite of fun, but I guess for some people they just like to make other people unhappy. But yeah, this is a terrible matchup for Ira. You should never win. Like you should always lose against an OTK Viscera. That being said, I have eked out some wins, but it's an abysmal matchup for Ira. It is literally made to beat Ira.
Yeah. I have seen an Ira player beat it, and I came close in a top 4 of a skirmish, but it's very difficult. It's like you say, it's like 95%. All right, let's rattle through these last ones before we get to the main one. Mech. So as I already said in the previous format, the Crucible format, Katsu, CC, that aggro deck was the best way to attack those mid-range or control mechs. They just, you punish them for having chambers and for needing to set up because you were just aggressive from, turn 1 and put on all these on-hit effects. Outside of that, these more boosty or sort of mid-rangey mech decks in Blitz, Brendan?
Yeah, so Flick Flack just works overtime here. It's a really bad matchup for mech. We usually don't see control mech in Blitz. We just see the kind of aggro boost mech. And this is an absolutely terrible matchup for them because of the Flick Flack. To the point where you can almost kind of just fatigue them because they will boost out their cards and won't have enough physical damage to get past you if you're getting value off those Flick Flacks.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Livia, so actually, in Constructed, to be honest, I'm not sure. I haven't really played this matchup with Ninja and Livia. My instinct would be that the on-hit effects are really going to be difficult for Livia to take and to defend against and be able to come back with their own hands. And if you ever start your blood debt clock, then as a Ninja player, you're going to be able to just put that pressure on the Livia player as soon as they start it, so that you try and get them to basically have to block with all their cards in hand and not be able to pay for their blood debt with the Livia ability. In Blitz, really interesting. Myself and Brendan did record a game for Channel Fireball, which you can go check out on their YouTube or on channelfireball.com and see that gameplay. I think really interesting matchup, a lot more interesting than I thought. I had a lot of fun playing that game, and it's closer than I thought. I thought it would be heavily Ira favored. I think it is Ira favored, but not nearly to the extent that maybe I thought.
Yep, it was very close. That's really all I can say. Check it out if you guys want to see more.
Yep, and then Bolton, you're really gonna, I think, struggle to defend well. It's probably just going to be a race in the Classic Constructed matchup. I've played this a couple of times from the Bolton side, not from the Ninja side, but it did just feel like a race. The Bolton can defend somewhat efficiently to your on-hit effects, but then as a Bolton player, they can't, playing off less than 4 or 5 cut hands is pretty bad. They also want to play 5 cut hands just as you do, so in that regard, it does become a bit of a race, and often the Ninja 5-cut hands are better with those on-hit effects as well, because you are forcing your Bolton opponent to have to take a bit of a backseat, and they don't play well off 2 cards.
Mm-hmm. So in Blitz, I haven't tested it in a while, and I don't really see it out in the wild in an actual event, but it does seem to be Bolton favored, specifically because you really can't defend well. Like, a lot of your cards do block for 2. It's everything in your deck is an attack action. You do have the defense reactions and a few non-attacks. But yeah, it does seem like theoretically it is a bit more on the Bolton side. That being said, the Ira deck is just such a value deck that I think that you're not going to have too much of a hard time with this on Ira, but it's hard to say now because there just really aren't a lot of Boltons running around in Blitz.
Yeah, draw your Flick Flex, you'll be right. All right, let's end with the one that probably people want to know about, Chain versus Katsu. We've seen this matchup in Classic Constructed already a couple of times. So in the Pro Quest, which you can go see the finals and the semi-finals of on YouTube, Fab TCG's YouTube, you'll see a more mid-rangey control Katsu basically deck these chain decks out, fatigue them out. You will see in Blitz the Ira versus Chain matchup come in quite regularly. I want to talk about a few things from the Katsu side to start with in the Classic Constructed sort of meta, or what's happening there. If you're playing this more aggressive style of Katsu, with belittles especially, you can try and race them. I think if you're trying to race it is Chain favored. They just explode on turns 3 to 4 with those shackles, and if you aren't far enough ahead, you're going to fall way behind. If you're playing this more sort of on-hit effect deck, I think that can be a way to attack them and can be really a way that works. Outside of the equipment for Chain, they don't really want to be defending with cards from hand, and a lot of their cards do defend for 2, so you get through that husk, you get through their headpiece and their arm piece. It is really difficult for them to stop on-hit effects efficiently. But by that time, the game could be 3-4 turns in, and you might have fallen behind. So it is a close matchup, I think. Any thoughts on Classic Brendan, or in terms of splits?
Yeah. So we've had 2 major events since Monarch came out. We had the PTI, and then we had the charity event. Katsu Control won the first one, and then Katsu Midrange / Aggro won the second one. So statistically, Katsu dunks on this deck. How it works out in actuality, I may or may not agree with that. It's too early to say. Go find out for yourselves. But if you do want to look at past tournament performance, at this time, currently, Katsu has absolutely dominated this deck in first place finishes. And let's just go into the Blitz with Ira. So, like I said, there's a lot of Iras that swear by the needle, right? They swing the needle on turn 1 and they break your husk. Your husk is, you actually cannot raise a reflex if someone blocks with husk because the needle breaks before reactions. So that being said, I don't know. It's weird. It's just Mon variance at this point, because if the chain player banishes hot, they will absolutely run over you. If you play a value game, get a lot of good flick flacks, and they don't banish so hot, then it's not so good. The chain decks that we do see in Blitz right now are just super high variance and very high rolly. And yeah, I mean, I don't know. We call them Chaino, right? It's Kano, but it's like a physical version of it.
It does feel like that. All right, those are the matchups. We're gonna quickly round out this pod. I know our deep dives are a bit longer, but we really want to make sure that we give a lot of context and a lot of information in these deep dives. Otherwise, we'll be calling them, I guess, shallow dives. So, how to beat it? How to beat Katsu? I'm going to start with Katsu and Classic Constructed. And to be honest, this is kind of Ira 2. It's very ninja focused. If you are trying to beat the ninja decks. Against the aggressive builds, a lot of the time what you need to be doing is presenting on-hit effects. So to some degree being aggressive in return, putting pressure on them with on-hit effects, whether it be from like a Bravo, a Warrior, Ranger as we'd said, or even some generic on-hit effects. Time your turns into their 5-carders, their 5-card hands, to throw them off their best turns. So the 5-card turns are so important for Ninja, as we've talked about. If you're able to put pressure on those 5-card turns and force them to have to block and blow up that hand, it's going to make their damage output so much lower. It's going to ruin the sort of synergistic abilities of their hands. So there's one of the key ways to attack not just aggro builds, but not just Classic Constructed, but even Ira as well. Defend smartly. So Dorinthia and Ninja are the 2 decks that will punish you hardest for not defending smart in this game. And Katsu and Classic Constructed probably has the biggest spike because of those Surging Strike, Lord of Wind combo chains. So if you don't defend smartly, we talked about it before, we talked about the way to attack into a player as a ninja, with starting with a combo card, playing the combo starter, playing the combo starter second. As the defensive player on the other side, get into the head of that ninja player and think about, okay, they've played their Surging Strike first. If I block this, can I actually stop them from Mugenshing me, for instance? Or am I then committing those cards and I'm not going to be able to stop the rest of that combo? So plan out the most likely threat density they have, and can you stop the mask, and can you stop the relevant combo piece from hitting? That's really important to do. And yeah, weigh up just how they're going to play the turn. The base level is block the second Kodachi. That's going to be the fastest way to stop their mask hits. But sometimes they're not going to lead with Kodachi. Sometimes they're going to lead with Kodachi into combo starter or combo starter first. So just got to be aware of those. And the last one I want to talk about is don't try and pivot too late. So you're going to need to pivot, especially if you are probably a bit more of the defensive side than the Katsu. They're presenting you a lot of on-hit effects. They're coming at you with Kodachis with red line attacks. If you bide your time, find the right turn to pivot. If you do it too late, they're just going to kill you with Kodachis. They're just going to still be able to block on their turn, even if it's blocking efficiently, and then either coming at you with like Kodachi off a blue or Kodachi threat. So you can't pivot too late. You want to get them on an off turn, like we talked about before. Maybe they go 5-carder and they only finish with a 4-carder, and then they come at you with very low damage, and you're able to swing back at them with a good 5-card hand. Then you want to put the foot on the gas and just keep those on-hit effects coming, or keep that damage coming to keep the tempo. But yeah, if you do it too late, you're gonna not have enough life to play with, and you need to probably take another. If it's mid game and you pivot mid game, you're probably gonna need to take another hit from them. So you need to have enough life to be able to do that. If you're on less than 15 life and you need to take another hit, plus then they can Kodachi you out, it's gonna be very, very difficult for you.
Yep, so moving into Blitz, I'm going to keep it super brief here. I think that it's very important to be the aggressor. If you leave a lot of cards in Ira's hand, they can do huge turns of those E-strikes and those flying kicks. and all sorts of funny business. There's not too much of like quips on how to beat Ira. It is a value deck. It's good at blocking. It's good at attacking. It's pretty much good at doing everything. But the most important thing, in my opinion, is that you need to respect massive momentum. You cannot let Ira draw off mask multiple times because, like I said, being a value deck, that just makes a deck that's already probably outvaluing just do it more. So I see a lot of players not respect the mask. If you're letting an Ira draw off mask, more than once a game, you're in a bad spot.
Mm-hmm. Cool. All right. That is our Ninja 101, our Ninja Deep Dive, our Lord of Wind episode. Take us into, the sign-off, Brendan.
Yeah, so just want to kind of plug the YouTube channel. We're putting a lot of content on there. We have the Arsenal Pass Time of the Round, the sort of kind of more freeform sub-podcast. This one that is a YouTube exclusive, so I highly recommend you check it out. We are also putting up, very in-depth deck techs as well as gameplay now exclusively on the channel. So we'd really appreciate if you go check it out and hit us with a subscription. It helps us out a ton. Me and Hayden are also now on Twitter. Us boomers have finally adapted and joined the social media platform. You can find me at the Fitty Shades, so THE, Fitty Shades, and Hayden is at Fjendale, so like Toma Fjendal, but so it's going to be FYEN_Dale. So go check us out on there, shoot us a follow, and interact with us, and we post stuff around Arsenal Pass and Fab and all that good stuff. Like we talk about a lot in the beginning of the pod, we are also on Channel Fireball, so the Blitz kind of Levia versus Ira gameplay just went up there. Go check it out. It was a really close game, like we said, and I think you're going to see some stuff out of Levia that you weren't really expecting. We do also have that affiliate code, Arsenal Pass, no space. So if you use it, always helps us out. And then, I think this is probably the day after this pod goes live. The Bravo versus Prism Classic Constructed will be going live on that YouTube. So we did get overwhelming feedback that you guys wanted to see Classic Constructed content. So if you're interested in that, it is going to be going up soon after this podcast. I think you guys will really enjoy it. It was a really awesome game. And that's it. Obviously, these class deep dives, are kind of a special thing for us. Let us know what you guys think if you want us to keep doing them. And obviously shoot us with a comment letting us know what class you want to see next. But with that is the end of Arsenal Pass episode 14, and we will see you next week.
See you later.